Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the Kiwi Lads channel. In this video, I will be doing my preview and predictions for the upcoming matches of international rugby that are coming at us this weekend. But if you do enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Nonetheless, let's get straight into this video. Right, so you may notice we aren't in the lounge for this video. We're out in a little studio. And for these preview and predictions, we're actually going to have timestamps for each of the individual matches. Also, alongside that, we have got on the Kiwi Lads Sport the clips going up of each of the individual matches. But nonetheless, we'll get straight into it. Australia A versus Samoa will be the first game that we are talking about. I'd love to be able to make these lights go in those colours one moment. Right, it seems like the lights don't actually like me very much. This is the first game of the weekend that we are covering on the channel. Australia A taking on Samoa, and it is actually going to be taking place in Suva, Fiji, as part of the Pacific Nations Cup. Now, both of these sides, they are stacked full of talented players from Super Rugby Pacific, including about 8 debuts that Samoa are making for this fixture. But first of all, we will be looking through at the Australia A side. So I will pop it up on the screen now for you guys who haven't seen the lineup. As you can see, a lot of players who probably were a bit unlucky not to get selected for the Wallabies, but they could only take so many into their series up against England. The likes of a Fraser McWright, Reece Hodge, a couple of those guys possibly would have liked to see themselves in the Wallabies, but these players, like I mentioned, they've all played throughout Super Rugby Pacific, so they'll have that little bit of chemistry built. Few Reds players in there, a couple Waratahs players making their way into the side. Now, something I normally do in my previews is look through at 3 key players who I feel will be able to have a big impact throughout this fixture. First of all, I have got Fraser McWright. I mentioned him a little bit earlier on. He was sensational in the breakdown for the Reds throughout Super Rugby Pacific, so I wouldn't be surprised if he gets himself a couple turnovers, although it may cost him a couple big knocks, because at the end of the day, these Samoan boys, they are not small. They will run straight over the top of you if you are in the wrong place in the breakdown. So McWright, he's probably going to get himself a couple turnovers, but also in the process may get himself a concussion just to go alongside it. But Will Harris, he is another player in that loose forward trio for Australia A. Played for the Waratahs throughout Super Rugby Pacific. Was very impressive as well. He started the season like a house on fire. Unfortunately, did kind of slow down a little bit near the end of the season, but I think he should still be able to have himself a pretty solid game, as he himself is pretty solid as well. Then the last name that I have got, it is the other vice-captain. So Fraser McWright, one vice-captain, Reece Hodge, he is the other. He's going to be at fullback for this game, and he had a dreadful start to the Super Rugby Pacific competition. He won't mind me saying that either, because at the end of the day, he ended up with a red card, a yellow card. I think he got injured, and then he got another red card or a yellow. He was having a shocker, but he turned it around massively, and the Rebels, they actually finished the season not too badly. I believe they finished in 10th, but they did have a couple wins for this season. But Reece Hodge, I think under the high ball, he's going to be very important. If the penalty does come on about the halfway line, he won't hesitate to try and kick it over. Although they've also got Ryan Lonergan, who can kick from 50 metres out, which is very impressive compared with the fact that he is the halfback for the Brumbies throughout Super Rugby Pacific. But with Reece Hodge out there, I think he's definitely going to have to make sure that he controls that back line and make sure that the youngsters who are alongside him are doing the job that is required. Now, looking through at Samoa, they haven't played a game since July of 2021, and that was actually up against Tonga in the Rugby World Cup qualifiers. They were able to go 2-0 up in that series, but they were supposed to be playing the Barbarians in around November, and it is a big shame that we didn't get to see that game happen. I believe it was about 3 hours before kickoff. They said, right, we've got too many cases, and we have to cancel the game. It was disappointing, because the thing is, some of these guys would have actually gone head-to-head in that matchup, because Australia, they had quite a few players making their way into that Barbarian side, alongside the likes of Pablo Matera, Malcolm Marks, Stephen Kitsoff. It was a great Barbarian squad, but we didn't get to see that matchup quite take place. But now we do get to see Samoa in action as part of this Pacific Nations Cup. Looking through at their 3 key players that I have decided will be able to have a big impact. Samuel Slade is the first. He was playing well throughout Super Rugby Pacific for Moana Pacifica. He has got some Samoan caps under his belt as well, which is very handy to have with some experience at international level. But he did play well. He's great in a line-out. He can also slot into that loose forward trio if they do have any sort of injuries for Samoa throughout the early stages of this contest, but I think he will be a big one at line-out time. He is going head-to-head with a couple Reds players, but he has faced them before in Super Rugby Pacific. The next name that I have got, it is Alamanda Matanga. He's great in the breakdown, similar to Fraser McWright, and I think he will be able to get himself 1 or 2 turnovers and also bring that physicality towards Fraser McWright. See if he can make him crumble a bit towards that 60-minute mark. Then the last name that I've got, it's actually a debut for Samoa, but I've watched this man for a while. He plays for Hawke's Bay in the Bunnings NPC. He was signed with the Hurricanes in Super Rugby, but this season did make his way over to Moana Pacifica and that is Lolagi Vizier. He didn't get a huge amount of game time throughout the season, but this man has got size, he's got power, and when he gets a little bit of time on the ball, you can certainly see those skills start to come out. So he is going to be a dangerous one, even though he's on debut. If he plays like he did in Super Rugby Pacific, and also like he does for the Magpies, I think he will be absolutely fine at international level. But now we're up to that stage how I try and predict who will be able to win this match. It's going to be a tricky one. Australia, they have got their hands full with England, which is why a majority of those very good players have ended up in that side. But Australia A is still looking very tough. Samoa, they will be bringing the physicality. They've got a few new names, and I think it might be just a few too many new names for them to be able to get themselves a win over Australia. So I'm going to say Australia win this matchup, and I am going to say that they do end up winning it by 11 for my prediction there. Bloody worked, didn't it? That was quite handy. I'll see whether or not I can do that for the rest of the video as well, see if it works out. But nonetheless, moving on to the next match, it is still the Pacific Nations Cup, and the next game that is taking place, it is going to be Fiji versus Tonga. The Pacific Islands going head-to-head in what always promises to be a physical encounter, and I'm glad that we get to see it as part of the Pacific Nations Cup. The last time we did see Fiji in action, it was actually in November last year for those autumn internationals. They did have their game up against Spain where they won 43 points to 13. They were able to lose. They did end up losing to Wales by 15 points, 38 points to 23. And then they had a 15-all draw up against Georgia, which was a very impressive performance from the Georgians there. Fiji started that match extremely well, but unfortunately just not quite able to finish it off. So I will say that because of how much rugby we've seen from some of these Fijian players in Super Rugby Pacific, they will be a lot better fitness-wise than they would have been going into those November international matches, because at the end of the day, the only players who were really getting a huge amount of running around were those guys who were playing overseas in the top 14 Gallagher Premiership and all of those competitions. But looking through at their side for Fiji, they've got a strong lineup, a few debuts. We will be hearing that said quite a few times throughout these videos, but I have highlighted 3 Fijian players that I feel will be able to do well throughout this fixture. The first of which is a man who had a bit of a 50-50 season for the Fijian draw at times. It is Frank Lamani. He'd go from having a very good game, being everywhere on the park, to then having quite a silent one and also getting himself, I think he got yellow or red carded in one of those mid-season fixtures, which he wouldn't have been too happy about, but he certainly brings an extra little bit of confidence to that backline for Fiji. And definitely because when you look at their lineup, number 9, Frank Lamani, number 10, it is Tete Tela, and then a few of those other guys slotting in there are Fijian draw players also. So that will help them out massively in this contest. Having a little bit of past experience with these same players, I think could be absolutely huge for the Fijians in this matchup. Then the next name that I have got, he had a tremendous Super Rugby Pacific season. He hardly did any wrong. He played brilliantly in Fiji as well in their match up against the Highlanders. It is Vinaya Habosi getting to make his debut for Fiji in this match. He's powerful, he's quick, and he also just seems to have that X factor that Fiji will be loving to have out on the wing. And he also plays for the Fijian draw, so there's a little bit more chemistry that's already been built with some of these guys in the backline. Although this next man that I have got on my list is someone who didn't play for the Fijian draw. He was tearing it up in the top 14, and that is none other than Waisia Nayafelevu at Stade Francais. He's a great player. He also has that offload game, which will be brutal for Tonga if they aren't able to shut it down early, because we know with Fiji, when they start to find that fitness, that is when they are the most dangerous. When they're thinking clearly for the full 80 minutes, you can hardly stop them. And I think that's something that we'll be looking forward to in the 2023 World Cup as well. And I should mention, they don't even have Semi Radradra, Pafiliato, Joshua Tuasova, all players who are missing from this lineup, and it still looks very strong. And that is why Fiji, I think, have a decent crack in this match up against the Tongans. But the Tongans, they have got a game coming up in their own right for that Rugby World Cup. They have a World Cup qualifying match that is coming up, and they'll be looking to add themselves into the Rugby World Cup. But Tonga, they've got a huge amount of international returns coming back for them, whether it's going to be Israel Folau, Charles Piatel, also getting thrown in there, Malakai Fekatoa, which will be great to see them all in the backline. But it's that question of how quickly will they be able to adjust into the Tongan side, because yes, they're all X-Factor players, but it's whether or not Tonga can get themselves a huge amount of opportunities up against Fiji here. But their last game was actually in November, and they are currently on a 4-match losing streak for Tonga. Their last one came up against the Cook Islands, which actually got them to where they are today with the Rugby World Cup qualifier coming up later on in the month. But the key players that I've gone with for them, I easily could have gone with those 3 big names that I mentioned, Fekatoa, Folau, and Piatel. Instead, I did take one of those guys out, and rather than him, I've put in Solomoni Funaki. Played well for Moana Pacifica. He's a big man in that 4-back, and at number 7, I think he should be able to cause some carnage in those breakdowns and try and maybe lure Fiji into giving away a couple penalties. I know that Fiji's discipline throughout the Super Rugby competition was pretty solid, but it's whether or not he can get under their skin enough to try and make them possibly make a couple other mistakes. Israel Folau is my next name, returning to international rugby, but he was playing for Australia the last time we saw him in an international kit, and he is going to be excited to be given, I guess, this kind of second opportunity at international level. He'll be excited whether or not there are a whole heap of nerves. I don't think there will be, because he's been playing in Japan, been looking very solid in that process, and under the high ball, you don't get too many better than Israel Folau, so that is why he is another player that I've got to look out for. And then the last name that I've got on my list is Charles Piutau. He plays for the Bristol Bears throughout the Gallagher Premiership, and yes, they didn't have the best season, but if you look at some of those games, he is one of those players who were trying to turn it around. It just didn't quite go the Bears' way, but he is one who will certainly be able to beat defenders, make meters, and really cause some big problems for the Fijians throughout this exciting fixture. But now we're up to that point now I try and predict who will be able to win this matchup. And for me, I think even though Tonga have got those extra players in stock, they have come back into their side, I think Fiji, they'll just have a little bit more chemistry. They'll have more time on the ball. They'll be able to find those offloads early on in the contest and try and wear down Tonga a little bit, who may not quite have that same fitness level as the Fijian players. So for that reason, I am going to say that Fiji are the side who are able to get themselves the win. Here we go. It's done it. Unfortunately, Fiji was the only flag that I couldn't find, so I had to do a makeshift one, which I pretty much just put black and white. But Fiji, they are a tough side, and that is why I think they will be winning this match. And I'll say that they win it by 15 for this contest. But now moving on to the next match, we are going in order currently of the matches taking place, and that means the next one that we have got, it is going to be Japan versus France. Now, these two sides, we've seen them play a little bit more recently than some of these other sides that I am talking about for international level. Japan, they're coming off a successful series and beating Uruguay twice in a row. And from the Japanese domestic competition, we have seen some stars starting to rise up. Yes, there are internationals in there, but we have seen a few homegrown Japanese players doing pretty nicely for themselves as well. 3 players that I have decided to highlight for this contest. Michael Leach, first of all, a huge amount of experience for that man. He is always dangerous, and with so much experience, you also gain that wisdom side of things. And I know that it sounds like I'm starting to get philosophical here, but wisdom, it's a pretty handy thing to have out on the rugby field. So hopefully we do get to see him pass on some of that wisdom to some of the younger Japanese players. The next name that I have got there, it is Iosaya Fafita. He is a dangerous individual out on the wing. He's got the size and the strength to be able to cause any defender problems, although he's going to be marking up with Damien Penaud in this match. And he is actually one of the names that I've got for France, because those two, they might be having a bit of a try-scoring contest between themselves out on that wing. Then the last name that I have got for Japan is Ryohei Yamanaka. He has been impressive in the last little while, found himself some quite nice form. It's just whether or not France can find those tactical kicks that could cause him a little bit of strife. But if they can't, I think he'll be running the ball back quite nicely. He's got a decent kick of his own, and he always chases his kicks hard. So that is why I've got him on there. But looking at France now, they are the Six Nations 2021 champions, recently being able to add that to their arsenal, and they haven't lost since July 2021, currently on an 8-match winning streak. Some of the opposition that they have beaten since that winning streak started, you've got the likes of New Zealand, Ireland, England, Argentina, and Scotland. So some very tough opponents for France, but I would say their 2 biggest wins on that list was certainly when they were able to beat Ireland in the Six Nations, 30 points to 24 in France, and then they were able to beat New Zealand by about 20 points in the Autumn Internationals. But looking through at the key players for France, I have got Pietro Malvaca, and that man, anytime I hear his name, it's normally because he's making either a line break or a massive hit on a member of the opposition. He's just a tank in the front row. He has been one of those key players for France for quite some time, and he's also going to be there for the 2023 World Cup. And that is if he hasn't got an injury, I should mention. If he does, it would be a big shame, as I think he will be able to be one of the keys for them in that World Cup as well. Then the next name I have got, it is Charles Olivon. We saw him in the Barbarians match up against England, and he seemed like he could have gone the full 80 minutes. He was very fit, he was very physical, scoring himself a try as well. So he might be able to do the same in this game up against Japan. And the last name that I have got for my French side, as you know, it is Damien Penaud. He has been impressive anytime he plays at international level. I believe he's got some insane try scoring record. How he seems to, no matter what the game is, be able to cross the try line, which is a very handy skill to have as a winger. Definitely when you've got those guys on the inside, like the French backline. Remy Vakatava, he is one to watch out for, but he isn't there on my list because I'm only allowed to pick 3. Unfortunately, that was the rule I gave myself. But now, because of that, we are up to this stage of trying to predict who will be able to win this match. Now, for me, I think this one should be relatively one-sided, but I think Japan are still going to put up a decent fight. But for me, France end up winning this game, and I believe France are going to win it by, I'll go 17. It's a bit harsh on Japan, but I think France are in a really good space at the moment for their rugby and should be able to tear it up out there on the park. But now looking through at the next contest that we are going to be talking about, it's a big game if you're a Kiwi or you are Irish. New Zealand versus Ireland, massive clash taking place. Now, we did see Ireland defeated on Wednesday up against the Māori All Blacks, but looking through at the lineup that Ireland selected for that game compared to this game, you've only got one guy who was in both starting lineups, and that is Keith Earls, who has a huge amount of experience under his belt. So it is a pretty much completely changed Irish lineup. But looking through, first of all, at New Zealand, the All Blacks, they have lost their last 2 matches, one against France and the other actually up against Ireland when they did lose 29 points to 20. That was at the Aviva, and it was a massive performance from Ireland. They played extremely well. The All Blacks just didn't seem like they quite were able to get themselves into the game, and I think that was down to the defensive style of Ireland. The New Zealanders, they didn't really have a counter for it, and it did cost them dearly, losing that match by 9 points. Looking through at 3 key players for New Zealand that I feel will be able to step up throughout this contest. First of all, I have got Ardie Savea. He's playing number 8 for this game for the All Blacks. Brings that physicality. He did very well up against the Springboks, and due to that, I feel he will be able to bring that physicality up against the Irish as well. But it's still not going to be too easy because he's up against one of the best loose forward trios, if not the best loose forward trio in world rugby today. It's going to be an awesome clash. Ardie Savea will have his hands full alongside Sam Cane, and also Scott Barrett actually playing number 6 for this contest as well, which seems to have really split the rugby community. I've seen a lot of people not too happy with Scott Barrett being the number 6, but we'll have to wait and see how he goes and whether or not he does get subbed off relatively early. I know that they've gone with Peter Gus-Soakula as the number 19 replacement, so maybe he gets a bit of a run sooner rather than later in that contest. Now looking through at my next name for the All Blacks, it is Beauden Barrett. Now the reason I've got him there is normally he's a big match player. We didn't see a huge amount of him throughout the final up against the Crusaders though of Super Rugby Pacific. But the game before that up against the Brumbies, he was everywhere. And that's what he's going to need up against Ireland. He's going head to head with an experienced fly half in Johnny Sexton. You'd have to say that Barrett has the pace advantage out of those 2 players by quite some margin. So that is why he's going to have to use it. Also find those guys on his outside. He's got Quintupaya and Ioane in the midfield. And then out on the wing, a debut for New Zealand, and that is Lester Whainga-Nuku, and he's actually going head-to-head with Keith Earls, which will be an exciting matchup of a youngster versus a veteran, and we will have to wait and see who gets the better of that one. Now looking through at the last name that I have got, it is Rieko Ioane. Now he isn't accompanied in the midfield by his Blues teammate Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, but he will certainly enjoy playing alongside Quintupaya, because Quintupaya, he'll run that ball hard at the line, which will create more defenders heading towards Tupaya, which may free up a little gap for Rieko Ioane to be able to run through, because we know once he's through a gap, he's normally gone, and it's going to be a tough job for Hugo Keenan in behind. But nonetheless, now looking through at Ireland, what I can tell you about them, they have got 4 out of 5 wins of the Six Nations, only losing to France 30 points to 24, and that was in France, which makes it just a little bit tougher to be able to take down the French. They lost to the Māori All Blacks 32 to 17, but the thing that I'm going to say about that game, like I mentioned, completely different lineup. Only Keith Earls starting this game and that last game, but they've got a strong bench, and it's actually some of those guys who played well up against the Māori All Blacks who are going to get themselves those bench positions. The likes of Bundy Aki, who did score the try for Ireland in that first half. But looking through at key players for Ireland in this game, I have got Tyke Furlong as my first name. He's going to really cause problems at scrum time. He loves a big push in the scrum, and he's going to be going head-to-head with George Bauer for a start, and then if they decide to sub Bauer early, he will be going up against Carl Tunuki-Afi. I think he will get the better of both of them when it comes to that scrum time, definitely because in that front row for Ireland, we've got to remember it's not just him who's a dangerous individual. He's got Andrew Porter with him, and also Dan Sheehan. So those 3 are going to have an almighty heave going every single time, putting the All Blacks under pressure. Now the next name that I've got is debatably one of the best forwards in world rugby today. It is Josh Van den Fleur. That man just keeps on tearing it up anytime that he plays. And I'm looking forward to seeing exactly what he can do up against the All Blacks. He brings that physicality. He's got a really good running game for a number 7. And also in the breakdown, you don't find too many better than Van den Flair. Then the last name that I have got, it's actually Johnny Sexton. Now, I know a lot of people, when they talk about key players for Ireland, sometimes just brush over Sexton. But for me, I think after the season I've seen from him in the URC, as long as he doesn't end up with a big hit on him early, I think he's got himself kind of like a new revitalised style that he's been able to find. He's actually running the ball a lot more than we used to see Johnny Sexton. Now, the question is whether or not he'd still consider running if big Brodie Retallick ends up driving him backwards. But I think if he doesn't, I think Johnny Sexton's going to have a decent crack at this matchup. I'm excited to see what he can do, and the fact that he's got so much experience. And not only that, we need to remember it's not just about the way that Johnny Sexton runs or passes the ball, it's how he kicks it. He was able to get himself plenty of penalties throughout that last match that New Zealand did end up playing Ireland, and that was actually the deciding factor. So 3-pointers, New Zealand's discipline up against Ireland is sometimes lacking, and that is why I think and now we're up to that stage of trying to predict a winner of this game. I know that no matter what, whether I say New Zealand or Ireland, people will probably disagree. But for me in this match, I think it's going to be extremely close because New Zealand, I don't see them running away with it, but I see them also still being able to get themselves the win. So for that reason, I'm going to say New Zealand win it, and I think New Zealand will end up winning it by 5. I think it's going to be close, but just able to hang on. It's at Eden Park, which is always a massive one for the All Blacks, but I think it's still going to be a good contest, and Ireland are going to have their A game on Saturday. But nonetheless, now moving on to our next fixture that we are going to be talking about, and this game is just as huge. Australia versus England. Massive clash between these two sides. There's a rivalry there that has extended back for decades, and now we get to see it go head-to-head in Australia. Now, Australia, they are coming off 3 losses in at the end-of-year Autumn Internationals, but they were all in the Northern Hemisphere. Australia's record down under is a lot better. They were able to beat South Africa twice throughout the Rugby Championship, which is a massive achievement, but they did actually play England in one of those Northern Hemisphere Internationals, and they did end up losing 32 points to 15, so not hugely close in that fixture. But I think we're going to see a different Australian side playing in Australia for this fixture. Looking through at the key players for Australia throughout this fixture, I have got Michael Hooper as one. He always seems to play well at international level. We saw an unorthodox try from him in the Autumn Internationals where he did end up scoring the try kind of backwards. He ended up backing into the player but putting the ball down over the line. It was unorthodox, but it was effective. And I think Michael Hooper, he's got a real rugby brain, and he's going to be seeing what he can do up against this English side. Now, we might see a little bit of Michael Hooper and Mara Itoje, just trying to see who can be a little bit more of a nuisance at the breakdown. And I say that in the most respectful way possible, because they're both that good at just causing opposition players uncertainty, I guess you would call it, with just not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing when you do reach that breakdown, and that could be the dangerous side. Might see a few penalties go in the way of Hooper, maybe a few penalties also go in the way of England though. The next name that I have got is Nick White. He had a decent season for the Brumbies throughout Super Rugby Pacific, but at international level he just seems to be able to snipe around the side of the breakdowns, which can be massively valuable for Australia, getting them to go forward extra metres and luring in some of the defence in the process. Then the last name that I've got, it is Samu Kerevi. Now, last time he made his way back into the Wallabies, it was for the Rugby Championship. He was on fire, running metres, defenders beaten, and he was looking very strong in the process. The thing is, though, he did not play in Super Rugby Pacific. Instead, he was playing in Japan, but with the Japanese league slowly getting stronger and stronger, it seems like it's not really a disadvantage to be playing in Japan. You do get yourself a little bit of a lighter season on the body. You don't take quite as many big hits as you would in Super Rugby or the URC, etc. But you still increase your fitness. You still find your way through defenders. And that is something Samu Kerevi is going to have to do up against England. Now, looking through at England, they did come off a loss not too long ago up against the Barbarians, 21 points to 52. But in that match, they were missing their Leicester Tiger players and their Saracens players, who were both playing in the Gallagher Premiership final, and that was probably a fair majority of the players they would have liked to select, as at the end of the day, if those two sides are at the top of the Gallagher Premiership, some of those players in there must be doing something right to get them towards that mark. In the Six Nations England, they didn't do the best. They were 2 wins out of the 5 games, which they would have been pretty disappointed with, and from what I've heard, this lineup that they've gone with here, England, is relatively close to what the public wanted to see. I think the only thing I've heard said is maybe Billy Vunipola is the only player that some people would take out, but it's going to be interesting to see how England go. If they have got almost the lineup that everyone wanted to see, you would like to think that maybe we will get to see a great performance from England as well. But the 3 players that I have isolated for England throughout this fixture, first of all, Jamie George. I think he is going to be dangerous at the rolling maul, because last time England played Australia, he was just that. He was able to use that physicality of his big forwards in front of him and just drive his way over the try line. He did it many times for Saracens throughout the Gallagher Premiership as well. And when you've got a good pack in front of you, it is easier to make those meters off a maul, get yourself that penalty advantage, and possibly get an Aussie in the bin at some stage throughout this fixture. Then the next name that I have got, it is Marcus Smith. And the reason I've got him there is, to say it nicely, he had a shocker. Unfortunately, up against the Barbarians, he didn't really get the ball off the tee the way he would have liked. He had a lot of missed opportunities. But still, alongside that, his running game was solid. So I think if he does get the kicking right, alongside that running game that he normally possesses, the offloading, the passing, I think he's going to be dangerous throughout this fixture, which is why he is there for me. And then the last name, a man who was playing in that final for the Leicester Tigers, it was Freddie Stewart. Now, he was one of those guys who came onto the scene not too long ago, a young up-and-coming English fullback, and he certainly proved why in the Six Nations. He was brilliant under the high ball, and also that running game. He's got the size to him, so he is able to normally make quite a few meters in the process as well. So that is why he is the last name that I have got on my list. Now we're up to that stage once again of trying to predict who wins this game. This one, I'll be honest, this is the one that's gone back and forth in my mind the most, of whether or not it's going to be an Australian win or an English win. How aggressive will we see England after losing to the Barbarians, and how ready will Australia be after having a majority of their players playing in Super Rugby Pacific? They'll be chomping at the bit to get out there and take down the English. I am going to say, for this matchup, I'm going to be extremely bold here, and I'm going to say that England win it by 3. Could be wrong, could be very wrong. Australia might win it by 15, but I'm going to say England sneak it in the end and get themselves a 3-point win. So we will have to wait and see whether or not that will be the case. But nonetheless, now moving on to our next game that we are talking about. It is South Africa versus Wales. Now this game, I think, is a little bit more one-sided on paper than a few of these other fixtures that we have seen. South Africa, they've won 2 out of the last 3 games of internationals that they've played in November, and one of those wins was actually up against Wales at Principality Stadium, winning at 23 points to 18, and what was an incredibly close fixture. In the end, South Africa, they did show that they were just a little bit too strong for Wales on the day. Looking through South Africa, they've got a strong side. They've got a nice combination of the young and the old making their way into this fixture, and that 4-pack, anytime you see it, you just know it's going to be dangerous. Like, you look through at that front row, you've got Kitsoff, Bongi Ombanambi, Franz Malherbe, and then you look behind them and you got big Eben Etzebeth, who'll be ready to run over the top of someone and possibly send a Welshman back to Wales. And that's just an attacker as well. He is a beast. He's been playing well in the last season, and I'm looking forward to seeing big Etzebeth back in action for the Boks. Then you've got Lou de Jager in there as well. The loose forward trio is strong. Franco Mostert, the utility forward, playing 7. This is going to be a tough day at the office for Wales, although the good news is they have got a decent lineup in this match, well, so I'm looking forward to seeing this contest go head to head. It's going to be a sellout in South Africa, the biggest crowd they have ever had for a South Africa versus Wales contest, I believe, and the crowd are certainly going to be getting behind the Boks. But looking through at 3 players that I've decided will be key for the Springboks throughout this fixture. The first one, Franco Mostert. I think he is going to be very dangerous. And like I mentioned, he can play 7, he can play in the locks if he needs to. He's pretty much going to be everywhere, and at line-out time, I think he's going to be a very useful option for them to be able to go to as well. Then the next name I've got is Makazole Mapimpi. Now, Cheslin Colby is returning back into the side, I should mention, but for me, because it's his first game back in quite some time, with that injury that he did have last season as well, I am going to say that Makazole Mapimpi is the busier out of the 2 wingers. It could easily be Colby, though, because that man seems to love to find his way into a contest when he doesn't get the ball that often. But Makazole Mapimpi, try-scoring record at international level is brilliant. He's got the pace, he's got that quick step, and he is going to be one to watch out for throughout this game. Then the last name that I have got is actually Damien Dialende. Number 12, crash ball, is something that he specialises in, and he always runs it hard. And him and Lukanyo Arm in that Rugby Championship, we're just starting to find that chemistry near the end of the contest. The good news is Damien de Allende, he is match fit, he's rearing to go, and I think he could break quite a few tackles up against Wales in this game. Looking through now at Wales, they won 1 out of 5 of their games of the Six Nations, and their last loss was actually to Italy, 22 points to 21, a monumental win for Italy, which is why a lot of people are saying that this game will be extremely one-sided in favour of the Springboks. But I hope Wales can put up a decent enough fight. They've got some good players in there. Talupe Faletau is the first name that I've got for players to watch out for. The big number 8 is going to be going head-to-head with Quagga Smith. Now, I will mention no Dwayne Vermeulen for the Springboks, and also no Ivan Ruiz, which was another player that a few people wanted to see make his debut up against the Welsh. But he will have to wait just a little bit longer. But Talupe Faletau did have an injury, I believe, at the end of last year, but he is back now, rearing to go. He was in the British and Irish line, so he's played in South Africa before, and we'll be looking forward to the monumental challenge. Next name that I've got, another British and Irish Lion. It was Josh Adams. He didn't get a huge amount of opportunities in that British and Irish Lions tour. I believe he did start a couple matches, but then from there, he did end up returning home because he was having a baby. Not him, his wife. Wasn't coming out of his. But looking through Adams for his form for Cardiff, he has been a little bit quiet, but then that could be because Cardiff haven't had the best run in the URC. He's a dangerous player. He's similar to Makazole Mapimpi in terms of that extra bit of pace that he possesses, and he's going head-to-head with Cheslin Colby. So it's that big question of whether or not Colby will be able to shut him down nice and early, which we know that Cheslin Colby has got the potential to do, but it's whether or not Adams has got that thinking brain to be able to work out how to stop that from taking place early on. He will also have to chase the kicks hard. And speaking of kicks, Liam Williams is the last name that I have got there for Wales. He is a great fullback, brilliant under the high ball, and if it's anything like we saw from the Springboks last year, we'll probably see a few box kicks from Faf de Klerk. So if Liam Williams has taken a majority of them, he might be able to shut down that opportunity of the mistakes coming, because we did see the Boks kicking from literally everywhere on the field, whether it was 22 metres out from the opposition try line or 22 metres out from their try line, they would still put up that box kick. I know that last game up against New Zealand, though, they changed the tactic and it did work. They were able to beat New Zealand 31 points to 29. So I'm hoping we see a combination of kicks and also a bit of run and rugby for the Springboks as well. But now we are up to that point of trying to predict who will be able to get themselves the win. For me, I think this one will be relatively one-sided, although early on I'd like to think that Wales will also be able to bring a little bit of fight to the contest. But yeah, South Africa, for me, are going to be able to win this contest, and they will be winning it, I think, by 16 points. Maybe more, maybe less. We'll have to wait and see which Wales side does turn up. But now we are moving on to our next one. Now, before we move to the last match, Scotland versus Argentina, we've got a different contest that we will be talking about. It is Romania taking on Italy. It is actually the first game of the weekend. Now, we have got a Romanian subscriber, and he helped me out big time for this one because I asked him, who are the players to watch out for? I have no idea who the Romanian players are. He's given me some very good intel as well. This game's being played in Romania, and they have got a decent record in Romania as well. A big shout out to you, Sebastian, for helping me out. But his first name that he has put, it is Florin Vlacu, who I feel like I've just said his name terribly, so I do apologise for that, Seb. But he is the fly half, most caps and top scorer for the Oaks. So that is the first name to watch out for Romania. The next name, it is Mihai Macovei. He is the captain of the Romanian side. He is the number 8, excellent in the breakdowns, which is something that we saw Italy actually do pretty well up against New Zealand in when they were playing in their November internationals. If Romania can get themselves a few early penalties and tick over a few three-pointers, they've actually had a very good win recently, Romania. And I do just hope that they do show that game in New Zealand, and if they don't, I'm sure I will be watching a replay of that one. Then the last name, it is going to be Hinkley Valvasa, and he is an inside centre. He was born in Wellington as well, which is a fun fact, and he has got power and speed to be able to break through the opponent's defence. So I'm looking forward to seeing Romania, and of course now making their way into the Rugby World Cup. So they've got a golden opportunity here to not just make their way to the World Cup, but also to put in a good performance up against the Italians. Now I know a little bit more about Italy than I do about Romania. So for the Italians, I have got Toa Halafihi as a player to watch out for. He is dangerous. He's also going to be a good head-to-head battle with Makove. So we will have to wait and see who gets the better of that loose forward trio. Then the next name that I have got, it is Paulo Garbisi. And we know how dangerous he can be from those November internationals. Even in games where Italy are struggling, he still finds a way to try and keep that contest alive for the Italians. And then the last name, it is Eduardo Padovani. Will be out on the wing for this contest. He is a very solid individual, so we will have to wait and see how he ends up going. But this is just a very short preview. I should mention I don't know a huge amount about both of these sides, but the best thing about the international schedule that we've got at the moment is there's that many games that we get to see a whole heap of sides play that we normally wouldn't get to watch, which is why it is absolutely awesome and a brilliant time to be a rugby fan as well. I asked Sebastian, I said, if you weren't Romanian, are Romania going to be able to win this game? And he mentioned about that home record that Romania possesses at the moment. So he had a pretty good point when it came to their home record. So because of that, I am going to be sticking with my boy Seb. I was going to send him some insects at one stage. Different story. We talked about it on a live stream. So because of that, I am going to be sticking with Seb. He's one of our moderators. He's been around the channel for a long time. And I do consider him as a good mate. So because of that, I'm going to say that Romania win this game by 3 points. I'm going to be close, but I think they should have a decent crack at being able to win this contest. But now moving on to the last match that we are going to be doing our preview for. It is Argentina versus Scotland. Now this one will be an intriguing one. It is the last game of the weekend that we will be covering on the channel. Argentina, they've got a very good side, including a man, Pablo Matera, who has got a Super Rugby title, actually winning his first ever title for the Super Rugby Pacific 2022 season. Alongside him, a couple other very happy Argentines were able to get themselves competition wins around the world. But now, looking through at Argentina, they did have a rough rugby championship. They did struggle big time. They weren't able to get themselves a win. But each time that they played, they seemed to improve just a little bit more. And I'm hoping we do get to see a good Argentine performance. It's being played in Argentina, so home field advantage for this contest up against a Scottish side who are actually missing 2 of their key players, but we will get to them in a short moment. First of all, looking through at Argentina, 3 key players that I feel will be able to stand up in this contest. It is Julian Montoya as the first name. He played extremely well last year for Argentina, so that is why I've decided to give him another crack. He loves the rolling maul, he's good in a scrum, and for me, he was one of the best hookers in the Rugby Championship. I know that Malcolm Marx possibly got the nod for that one because of the tries that he did score late in contest, but Julian Montoya, I have decided to go with him as my first name. Then the next name, it is Pablo Matera, the man that I mentioned, playing for the Crusaders. He was considering cutting his hair into the shape of a mullet, so really embracing that Kiwi culture. Also does know a bit of Māori. Pablo Matera has been really embracing heading to New Zealand for this season, and he has got a title to prove it as well. But now heading back into international level, he always brings that physicality. Now his discipline at the end of Super Rugby was a bit of a concern. He did end up with at least 2 red cards in the competition, a few yellow cards as well, but overall, he's going to give you an 80-minute performance, and he's going to play with his heart on his sleeve, which is exactly what Argentina will want in front of a home crowd. Then the last name that I have got on my list is Nicolas Sanchez. Now, he did have a few injury troubles last year for the Rugby Championship, but his kicking, I think, is going to be something that if Argentina do win this game, it is going to be down to how many 3-pointers they are able to slot over for Nicolas Sanchez, because he has got that accuracy, and those 3-pointers could be absolutely massive for Argentina throughout this one. Now, looking through at Scotland, they didn't have the best Six Nations, but you would also say they didn't have the worst Six Nations that they could have had. They had a few good performances, couple close games as we always expect for Scotland. Sometimes they're on the right side of the decision, sometimes they are on the wrong side, and for the Six Nations, unfortunately, just on the wrong side a few more times than they would have liked. Looking through at key players for them, I have got Matt Fagerson as my first name. He is the big number 8. He was brilliant last year on the November Internationals, so I think he will be able to have another solid performance going head-to-head up against Pablo Matera. Then the next name, I've got another big solid player, and that is Duan van der Merwe. He's the big winger, number 11, been playing in the Gallagher Premiership, so not actually playing in the URC, alongside quite a few of the other Scottish players, such as the ones playing for Edinburgh, but he will be excited to get himself a crack at international level up against the tough Argentinian side, and he will be able to run over some of these guys in the backline. Then the last name I've got is actually the other winger in this contest, and that is Darcy Graham. And he also had a pretty good November Internationals. Him and Kyle Steyn in that first matchup, scoring about 5 tries combined, which was extremely impressive. And if he can even get himself one in this contest, Scotland might have a decent crack of being able to go on and get themselves the win. The big thing for me, though, here is because they don't have Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell, what kind of impact will that have on the back line? Now, in their place, they have still got some very good players slotting in there. Argentina at home, though, are going to be extremely tough to beat because they just show that passion in front of a home crowd as well. If there isn't much of a crowd, though, that could be a completely game-changing matchup. I think this game, actually, now that I think about it, is probably the hardest of the weekend to predict, but I'm going to say, even with those players missing, I think Scotland get themselves the win, and they will win it by 5 in their game in Argentina. But nonetheless, that is going to be the end of this video. It is actually quite a long one on the channel, but like I mentioned, it is split into the timestamps down below, and also on the Kiwi Lad Sport, each of the individual matchups will have themselves a clip, so you can see what our prediction was for those contests, and also talk all about those games on those videos as well. But nonetheless, thank you all very much for tuning in. If this is something you do want to see more of in the future, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all for the next one.